Hello everyone, back again with Sam Gregson of Bad Boy of Science YouTube channel,
Hey everybody.
and we're here today to talk about a news story that's been bugging me. I'd say it's been uniquely bugging me for the magnitude of the story. It's been annoying me more than it should be really, and I thought it'd be, since it's to do with British politics, I thought it'd be good to get my old British friend Sam involved.
It was bugging you. You told me about it yesterday, and now it's bugging me. So
Yeah, right.
we're gonna have a good old bugathon now and have a go through it.
Yeah, that's and the story is that the TV license in the UK. I'm going to try and explain that in a bit for those of you who don't understand TV
Yeah.
license. But TV license was previously free for everybody over the age of 75 or any households containing an over 75-year-old, and now it isn't. A couple of years ago, I should have written this down, but a couple of years ago, the government handed over the right of denying, the whole license fee thing was handed from the government's responsibility to the BBC's own responsibility, and the BBC waited a little bit out of, I guess, decency,
Yeah.
and then decided to make this change that I think everybody was kind of expecting a little bit.
Yeah.
I was going to explain a little bit about what the license fee actually is.
Can do. I've written down some points as well. So
All right.
if you want to go for it,
Well, I've been talking enough, so maybe you should go ahead. We'll take it in turns. I'll take a little break.
okay. Well, as far as I understand, in this country, if you own a TV and you decide to watch any live services on that TV, so if you decide to watch CNN or Fox or any other channel or just Channel 4 here in the UK, terrestrial channel, whatever you choose to watch, if you own a TV, you have to pay a TV license. But the money from that TV license only goes to the BBC, not the other live channels that you might be watching on your TV. It solely goes to the BBC. So even if you don't watch any BBC programming, so you don't watch BBC News, you don't watch any BBC documentaries, all that money goes to the BBC. And previously, 3.7 million pensioners here in the UK were getting that license for free. They were getting covered for free. And now those over 75s are going to lose that free TV license and going to have to pay £154.50 annual fee to have a TV that has any sort of live stream on it. So the BBC ostensibly. So a lot of people are complaining because obviously pensioners usually they're struggling to pay these costs. It's also a bit of a slap in the face for older people who've potentially worked all their lives. We just had the sort of D-Day celebrations. People are sort of jumping on that and saying it's a slap in the face for old people. So people aren't happy. It was kind of brought in as a free thing in the 2000s. Gordon Brown, the former Prime Minister, brought it in to tackle what he called pensioner poverty. So a lot of people were presumed to be in relative poverty, older people. They made the license fee free. But then when austerity came along, the Conservative government looked to kind of row back on that. And in 2017, I believe it was, they pushed that responsibility, as you said, from the public purse, from the government, onto the BBC. And they said, look, you, the BBC, are going to have to give free licenses to everyone over 75. And they've been kind of phasing that in with the BBC for the last couple of years. But now it's kind of starting to bite. The BBC have decided, well, we don't really like that. And we want to row back and not cover those over 75. So
Okay.
that's the situation we're in.
All right, just a few things there. I actually didn't know that it was all live TV. I thought it was just BBC channels, because BBC channels, for those of you who don't know, don't have any adverts. They have adverts for their own TV shows, but they don't show adverts for food, clothes, shopping liquid. Just the normal ad breaks that you get every 15 minutes don't occur at all.
That's
You
right.
just get a little bit of a sort of BBC preview, like these are some things you can watch on BBC in between shows. But
Yeah.
that's what you're paying for. I thought was the privilege of watching BBC ad free. That's how they get their money. Is a license fee. I didn't understand that until you said that, but I trust that you did your research a little bit better than I do, because that's usually the case.
I believe that's true. Well, you know that if it is wrong, and I don't think it is, but if it is wrong, we'll be very quickly corrected.
We'll put it on the screen. Yeah, we'll put it on the screen right now with the big
exactly.
noise.
So it'll be
Okay.
it'll be fine. Yes, that's one of the advantages of BBC is that they fund themselves through this essentially a kind of tax on owning a TV, which is this license fee, and also to some extent through selling their shows, their bigger shows, to people like Netflix. So they have a private revenue stream, but most of their funding is this kind of public funder. They're seen as a public broadcaster, and they get this sort of pseudo tax through essentially a tax on owning a TV, which is the license.
Yeah. I just want to make clear that it's not the TV. It's not like owning a I don't know what else you need to license for, but it's not like driving a car. It's like the TV. You can have a TV in your house. You can have 100 TVs in your house if you want.
Yeah.
It's just attaching that TV to an aerial that can receive. These television services. We have a TV. We don't pay the license fee. Because we don't have any aerial at all. We just use the internet. We watch YouTube, and you're not allowed to actually play any BBC shows from iPlayer, which is the kind of Netflix of BBC. You can't watch that either, we don't. And although I do feel kind of like I'm being a bit naughty by not paying this fee. I'm really not getting any of these services that I'm paying for, that I would be paying for.
Well, this is a really interesting...
I'm not doing anything wrong.
Yeah, this is a really interesting point of that, because I've been to your house. You have a similar setup to kind of I have here, where I watch, things from my computer. I might watch on the TV. I might play Xbox on the TV.
Yeah.
But I don't actually use the TV to get any sort of live broadcast, and definitely not the BBC. So the chap came round last year.
Oh, he actually came. We keep getting letters, but he never turns up.
The door and was like, "Do you have a TV?" And I was like, "Yeah, I play Xbox on it. Can I just check that you do that?" And he started like fondling around with the cables to check that it was only the Xbox that was plugged in, and it wasn't plugged into the aerial. So it's kind of weird question of guilt until innocence around the kind of license fee. If you opt out of the BBC, to some extent, you're seen as a slight sort of British pariah, maybe.
Definitely suspicious. But maybe this is. I was thinking of getting into this later, but since you brought it up, the guy who the man who comes round, who's constantly threatening to come round with these letters. If you don't pay a license fee, you get these letters consistently saying, "We're going to send a man round," and then if you don't answer the door, we're going to send another one. They actually have no legal right to enter your property without you inviting them in. Yeah. So a lot of people don't know this. I think I'm not suggesting that anybody should steal BBC. I think people should just stop watching TV because it's rubbish.
It's like that vampire film. What was it? Let them in or whatever. They can't come across.
That's exactly it. Yeah,
they're not allowed to cross the threshold unless you. To
be honest, though, I think they're a bit cheeky though, because I've heard that if you leave the door open. But don't explicit. It's not like vampire rules. If you leave the door open,
BBC people or both,
they can walk in through your door if you're standing there with it open.
They also don't have a reflection. I can attest to it.
Okay, yeah. Right, so this story that's an outline of the license fee and why it's pointless and why it's probably the BBC is probably going to die a death soon. I think
that's an interesting thing, and I don't know if you wanted to cover this while we're kind of on it, but. The license structure is it's dying on its arse as a way of funding the BBC, because, as we've just kind of said, this kind of worked in 1946 when it started, when there was no competition for the BBC. So essentially, if you owned a TV, you were watching the BBC because you didn't have a choice. So it was basically a BBC tax. But now with a lot of competition, there's people who watch TV all day, but they don't actually watch the BBC. So it's weird to be being charged for those services when you're not actually using them. So the BBC is probably going to have to move to a different funding structure. Now we can have a discussion about whether that's just general taxation. So you have a BBC tax which is in full view and people can see that they're paying something for a public broadcaster. We can probably talk about the merits and the cons of having a public broadcaster, or they're going to have to move to having more kind of private revenue streams, so selling more of their shows to, say, Netflix or Amazon Prime's, maybe bringing in adverts, or maybe having a subscription fee, like other services where you can opt in and opt out like you would with a Netflix on a monthly subscription. So they're going to have to do something. And that was part of the thing in 2017 was when they took on this role of having to pay for those pensioners over 75, they got a lot of concessions from the government. Like you had to have a license to watch iPlayer, which is the historical catch-up for BBC. And the BBC thought that was going to bring them a hell of a lot of revenue. and it hasn't shaken out that way. They thought they were getting the better out of this deal with the government, taking on the 75s, having to pay for them, but getting all these concessions back, like not having to roll out rural broadband, getting people to have to pay a license fee for iPlayer. And they thought, Tony Hall, the Director General, said at the time, I think we'll be slightly up on that deal. And then 2 years later, he's turning around and going, "Ooh, I'm messed up. I don't want to have to honour my side of this bargain."
Okay. Well, the main reason that this story is bugging me, and I think you touched on it as well, we were discussing the fact that we were going to talk about it. It's the kind of sense of entitlement that I feel like it's really, that's what's annoying me, is the sense that the people who have been receiving this license for free, they feel like because they've been receiving it free before, that it's a complete outrage to now have to pay for it. Yeah. Even though they probably, if you'd never given them that £154.50 a year, they probably wouldn't ever miss that. The amount of gratitude that people express when you give them something for free is completely disproportional to the outrage that they will express if you take away that thing that is free.
Yeah,
it's just such an obvious example of that,
cat, isn't it? The cat's not really bothered for the piece of string. But when you take the piece of string away from it, suddenly it's going mad and pulling the damn thing. You know what I mean? I want it back. Yeah, there's definitely a video for you to do in there about the psychological effect of having something sort of taken away that you did. Yeah. You're supposed to have, essentially.
Yeah. No, it's absolutely. I think it's absolutely the case for. And this isn't like an argument against. This isn't like my entire viewpoint on any kinds of benefits or whatever. Like that's a very complicated issue.
Sure.
But it is, I think, observable that when you start to give someone something, you can't. That can never be temporary. You must always give them that thing forever, or they will hate you when you take it away. There's no end. You know, if you start giving, whatever it is, any kind of something for free or some kind of extra benefit, it's then just becomes expected. And
they've got another one of those green petitions up with the portcolours, the ones that always pop up whenever there's any
Change UK, is it?
Yeah. No, the
oh no, sorry, no, that's not the name of it. Change.org is the name of the petitions.
Now, usually it's revoke Article 50 or kill all dangerous dogs or whatever. Today it's everyone boycott the BBC, it's not worth it, with so many million people who signed it, and they'll have to debate it in Parliament, and then nothing ever happened.
Yeah, I think it's another interesting case of people don't understand what it means to get this for free, because obviously the more people pay into the BBC, that is their only source of funding, and they will not they will not continue to produce the TV shows that you like if they are not funded.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I think with the population aging, there's a lot of old people, fewer young people.
Yeah.
And young people just don't watch TV anymore, and a lot of them are getting wise to the fact they don't have to pay their license fee if they're watching it. They're watching Netflix, which is cheaper, by the way.
Yeah.
You could get about 4 different subscription services for the price of a license fee. You could, you could get Hulu, Amazon Prime, Netflix, and YouTube is free. Young people aren't paying it anymore. People probably under the age of 30, I think, dropped off a lot, and they're not watching it either.
Yeah,
only people watching the BBC.
Absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
Yeah,
and I think what this sort of touches on for me is we have this attitude in Britain that the BBC is a kind of public good, and therefore everyone should watch the BBC essentially because it's this public broadcaster. It's seen as being more objective than, say, if you're in the United States and you have CNN and Fox kind of bashing at each other. So it's something that's worthwhile to have, and essentially we should pay for it through a form of taxation, which in the past has been the license fee. Now, you can have that argument. That's fine. We can discuss that. And you can have a general BBC tax, as I say, that pays for that because you think it's worthwhile. But it's a bit odd for us to say, the over 75s have been getting it for free, but the young people haven't been getting it for free, but we also think it's a public good. So if it's a public good, why are the old people getting it and not the young people? Surely, if it's a public good, the idea would be that it was means tested regardless of your age. So if you're poor and young, you get free BBC.
Yeah,
if you're poor and old, you get free BBC. If you're rich and old, you don't get free BBC. And if you're rich and young, you don't get you don't get free BBC. So there's this kind of weird tug of war going on between why were these old people getting free BBC? Presumably because we thought it was some sort of public good. I can understand giving people a free TV when they're a bit older because they're lonely and they don't have any sort of contact with the outside world. But I don't understand why that would be tied to the BBC specifically.
That's a good. You've brought that up interesting actually, because nobody says that owning a television, the actual hardware, is a right. Nobody's giving those to pensioners for free.
Yeah,
so surely, if you're saying that it's a human right that pensioners are so lonely that they must have TV for free, then surely there must be also the television, which costs probably a lot less than £150. So that should be free as well, really.
The plasmas into the old folks' home, you know what I mean? If they're gonna do this consistent line,
and the electricity, of course, to power it.
Well, exactly. So what I don't really understand is why that's tied to the BBC. I could understand a situation where you said, look, these old people need to have a TV because they're lonely. Why can't we just give them a coupon that says, here's your £150 for the year, pay for Hulu or Netflix. Pay for the BBC. So you get that choice of what you want to watch.
Absolutely.
I think old people are largely been taken for granted as, they'll want the BBC because, they've always had it and, the war and
It's pretty condescending, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's kind of a condescending attitude. Whereas I know my grandma would have liked to watch all the, crime documentaries on Amazon or whatever.
Yeah, my in-laws, they love YouTube, and my parents, they love Netflix. I mean, I think they like the BBC as well, but they are all over the history documentaries on Netflix and the kind of just interesting YouTube content. It's like YouTube is expanding to the point where they no longer it's not just for kids and teenagers anymore. It actually is being interesting content being produced for people of all ages.
Exactly right. There's so much
and 75 is actually...
People don't like being locked into or being told essentially what they can watch to a degree, which is what old people are being told, essentially.
Yeah. One other detail I forgot to bring up was the fact that the people who are no longer getting it for free are over 75s, but if they are receiving a pension credits from the government, that means they're kind of on old people benefits. I hope that's not an offensive term, but they're on...
I'm sure it's not. I think that's...
Yeah, it means they're low income. It means their pension, their private pension is not covering all of their...
That's right.
Their expenses. So it means that they've got... They're not low earners, but they're the low income... They're on the low income pensioners who are still getting this for free.
Yeah.
It's only the people who are not on these pension credits over 75 who are having to pay. And presumably these are people who can afford £150, £154.50 a year.
Again, this is reinforcing this idea that the government thinks that having the BBC is a public good. Again, this means testing is coming in. If you can't afford it, we'll provide it. Well, why are you not providing it for the young people before then? Why is it only a public good for people who are so old? That there seems to be this weird sort of dichotomy going on there.
It doesn't make sense at all. It only makes sense when you look at the paradigm that you have it, therefore you want to keep it.
Yes.
I think there's really no justification for it aside from that. We could talk about why it got brought in the first place, but that's really what I wanted to talk about, is just this sense, like, there's no logic behind it that is, apart from the fact that old people like TV, which seems to be just what gets repeated a lot. Like, nobody's banning old people.
You're right. No, you're exactly right. But like I said, it could be any TV. Why does it have to be the BBC? I understand the idea that they need a TV. It's an outlet to the world. They're lonely. They can't get out. Maybe they're bedbound. Completely understand that. Why does it have to be the BBC? It doesn't. It could be anything. And what is another weird part of this is you get this sort of cronyism going on between the government and the BBC, because now essentially the BBC, the government has outsourced a decision about welfare. So this is basically a welfare spend. That the government said was a welfare spend to get people over 75 to be able to watch TV has now been outsourced to the BBC. So now the BBC is essentially making government welfare decisions. And deciding who gets exempted
I don't
on a
think that's
tax
quite
and
accurate, though. I think to be called welfare, it would have to actually come out of taxes, meaning that somebody is paying for these license fees out of the government's purse. But I didn't think that was that ever the case. I figured that it was just they were getting it for free
it's
and
always,
nobody had to pay for it.
It's always a slightly odd. People get upset when you say that the BBC comes out of taxes. It's sort of a tax on having a TV, but people complain when you say the word tax. But what I'm saying here is, if I want the BBC, I have to pay that TV tax. Whereas, if I don't want, if someone's over 75 and poor, and they want the BBC, they get it for free. So the BBC is, in a roundabout way, making welfare decisions for the elderly, which the government probably should be making. I don't think they should have ever really been outsourced from the government to the BBC. The role of the BBC is to be as objective as possible. That's why we have it as a public broadcaster. That's what we're told is the reason for having it. That's why Corbyn loves it so much, because I reckon he thinks he could get his spin through it, and he's always saying that he'd put more money into it. But if they're making these decisions, it becomes an inherently political body. And we've seen recently how they like to make these political statements about equal pay and such like that. They've committed to having these sex and race quotas by 2020. Some people think they're biased on certain topics like Brexit, and I think that'd be hard to argue. So when you've got this continued interaction between government and BBC...
Is that you?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I got a beep, but I think it's okay. When you have this continued interaction between government and the BBC, I just don't think it's a good look. You should try to keep them as separated out as possible.
Okay. I think you've got more of a complicated stance on this than I have. Because I was actually just irritated by it on a kind of I don't know what it is, like on a base level. I think to be honest, I think the BBC should they should operate like a private company, and if the private company wants to have a license, they can make whoever they want pay for this.
Exactly right.
I think I think the more people I have pay for it, the better the shows will be.
Correct. Well,
the
that's a really
better program.
interesting point that was made yesterday is that the standards have kind of really seemed to have gone down, at least in the number of repeats that you see on the BBC.
I really wouldn't know.
There's so many repeats and so much Holmes Under the Hammer or, Dickinson's Real Deal and all this sort of absolute tosh. And it's like, well, I would really like to have a choice of where my money goes rather than it going into this sort of, decision made for me. As that level of competition goes up, as you say, things surely can only get better. I wanted to ask you a question of, do you think we need the BBC? Do you think it's a good that people should these pensioners have been getting it paid for? Should everyone get it paid for if they're poor? Is it something that we really need to have?
I mean, I think you probably know what I'm going to say. I think I don't really I could definitely get into an argument about things that are public goods and aren't. We've got things like roads that seem like pretty sensible to have the government paying for, having taxes taken from. But I'm actually very critical of pretty much anything becoming a public good or becoming nationalised, and services that are nationalised are usually much worse. So I think it's obvious that BBC's whether it's because the funding has been going down as people stop paying for it and because the pensioners are older or whatever, the BBC just seems like it's a bad service. Maybe I like reading the BBC News
yes,
webpage,
that's the thing I read,
but I'm not reading it to get a good neutral reporting of any news. I'm reading it just to see what does the BBC think about this. Like, what's the propaganda of today? To be honest,
it's interesting because I look at the BBC website and I see a lot of the big stories are on there, but I also see a lot of sort of social justice guff and value signalling rubbish. The stuff about equal pay.
There's always some weird, like tiny stories like that on there.
On the news beat stuff. It's just absolute garbage. And the point that I would make is people always make this point that, the BBC's far more objective. And in America, you have more sort of opinion journalism. It'll be CNN versus Fox. But are things less frayed and less polarized in the States than over here? I don't really think so.
I think whatever's going on in America, which is the obvious comparison, I think their news is a little bit messed up, and I wouldn't want. That's not one of the things I admire about America, to be honest. I wouldn't ask for that.
I agree. But does the BBC do a really good job of getting in between the Guardian and the Daily Mail over here.
Look, I don't think they do that well. I think they do okay, and I know a lot of people in the comments are going to be mad at me for that, but I think they actually, like, it could be worse, to be honest with you. Yeah. And I'm not saying that should make it a pub. I don't think that should make it a human right when living in the UK, or that it should come out of taxes or anything like that. But I think I'm actually not that annoyed that the BBC exists, although I think they probably will just disappear into in what's the word I'm looking for? The irrelevancy.
Yes. No, I'm not too bothered. I'm not too bothered either. And as I say, I use it for. Usually, I can get a reasonable amount of objective facts of news out of it. That's kind of the way I use it. But I do.
You know what the bias is, so you just put it through the bias filter and you kind of figure out what the actual news story is.
Yeah, exactly right. I know what I'm dealing with, right?
Yeah.
But the thing I object to, which I think, and tell me if I'm putting words in your mouth, that I object to is similar, I guess, to what you object to, is this idea that the state, a public broadcaster, has a job to kind of tell you what is objective and what is kind of clean news. Whereas I think in any sort of developed democracy and reasonable democracy, that falls upon the individual citizen, not to be so gullible and to read the Guardian and to read the Daily Mail and see the facts that are the same between them. And as you say, put it through the bias machine and go, look, I know the Guardian's foaming left. I know Daily Mail's pretty right, foaming right. And I can work out what the actual story is for myself. I don't want to have my hand held and been told, this is the Pravda that's coming down from the state. So I kind of get a bit of a feeling like that people lean on the BBC in that way, which I don't like. But as you say, I don't really hate the BBC. I'm happy kind of for it to be there. And as you say, it just seems to be drifting into the background as more competition comes along and sort of gobbles up the ground. So...
well, as long as I don't have to pay for it.
Well, there you go. Exactly.
I'm not paying for it, you're not paying for it. If other people want to pay for it, that's fine. If it disappears because there's not enough funding, then I'm not gonna cry for it, to be honest.
We're not going to do a crowdfund for it. It's like you said. People want to watch it. People think it's great in the comments. Perfectly, you're right. Enjoy it. Watch it. I just don't think it's that great, to be honest.
I think people in the comments probably don't, to be honest.
Well,
I got a lot of negative comments when I said that BBC was one of the more neutral news sources that I knew of.
I think it's one of the more neutral, but
yeah.
I think the BBC struggles with a couple of things. One is that the remit is to be unbiased, so immediately any bias is magnified because you go on CNN or you go on Fox, you know what you're getting, and if it's biased, you just go, well, yeah, it was always going to be biased. Whereas when you go to the BBC, it has a remit not to be biased, so any slight bias is magnified 100-fold, and really upsets people. So I think there's some sort of over selection of that, but also I don't think they're particularly unbiased.
Okay. There's something else I was going to bring up with he's talking about the BBC in general. I think just to really hammer this point home, I think I really just want to make it clear that services are better when the people paying for them are the people who are using that service. When you spend your own money on something, you make better decisions about you make better purchasing decisions when you're spending your own money. So when we have this bizarre situation, whether it's pensioners or anything really, where the people who are using it the most are not paying for it because it's seen as being so integral to their well-being that they must get it for free, you're actually not getting that. Those people are not getting a good service because they're not the consumers in this situation. The BBC is going to be tailoring their content to people who are paying, and I think it's so easy to come off sounding callous to people who aren't sympathetic to this point of view. But my point is that the £150 a year, it's I think you can pay it off monthly installments. You don't have to pay it all at once. It's not that much. If you really do love the BBC, I think that would be a price that you'd be willing to pay. And if you can't afford it and you're on pension credits, I think that's perhaps a nice concession for the BBC to make, is that if you're on benefits, or whether you're old or possibly even at any age, maybe, I don't know.
I can
see that happening.
it's a very kind of Milton Friedman-esque point that you're making, that nobody spends your money as efficiently as you do yourself.
Yeah.
So as you say, the young people aren't getting a good service out of the BBC because presumably they're catering to the old people. So it's it's just a very odd way that they're funding themselves at the moment. And as you say, it's going to fall into irrelevance. It seems.
Yeah, and the more they lose their funding, but by giving stuff away for free, the faster it's going to happen, because they sold off the Great British Bake Off, and I presume that was a funding decision because everybody loved that show. Like I liked it so much, I would consider getting a TV license because I liked watching it live. It's like I'm not going to wait 5 years for it to appear on Netflix because I was enjoying it. I was enjoying the experience of watching it along with the rest of the nation, and. Yeah, I think if it weren't for
cupcakes for the little nipper when
you're
gonna be well up.
Well, no, I don't do the baking. I just like watching.
All right, fine, okay. Vicarious baking, yeah.
Yeah, I think I would be if I lived alone. I think I probably had TV license. My husband would never allow such a thing because it would be a waste of the family money.
Yeah.
But if I lived on my own and I'd like to have TV on in the background because I'm lonely, I think I would pay for a TV license just to have the news and the Bake Off. But now they've sold the Bake Off, so what am I going to watch? Homes Under the Hammer? I don't think so.
There is a point to be made, I guess. On top of the loneliness of old people, is also obviously they're familiar with the BBC because they're older people, and also they're less tech savvy as well. So maybe they're
That's
less.
That's changing, though. I was going to say that earlier. Is that it's changing?
But they're
old people are getting younger all the time.
Like you have, with the laptop linked into the TV.
They probably don't have that kind of setup, but yeah, that's I think people do underestimate old people to some extent. They
definitely do.
Yeah, 75 is actually not that old anymore. When I think about a 75-year-old, I think a lot of them probably can operate a smartphone.
Yeah.
And probably know how to get bring up the YouTube app on their smartphone if they wanted to. Maybe not casting it to their TV or plugging it in or whatever, but yeah.
Well, that's I actually think a lot of the irritation with the BBC, as you say, it's come because something's been taken away that we had, but they also got into this. As I alluded to earlier, they got into this bargain with the government and got all these concessions, to be able to raise that license fee. So they've raised it for the last 3 years in line with inflation. And that was a concession they got from government for taking on this role of covering for the over 75s. They got out of having to roll out this broadband in the countryside. They got this concession that anyone watching iPlayer would have to buy a TV license. So the BBC got all of these concessions that brought them more money and was things that they wanted. And then as soon as it gets to the stage where they're going to have to fully cover for these pensioners, they've said, oh, we want out now, we're not paying it. So they've kind of got all the benefits of that deal with the government and then reneged on doing any of the work because, Tony Hall seems to have got his numbers wrong when he did the original deal. So I think there's a bit of the BBC is sort of built on trust. People are supposed to trust it. It's supposed to be objective. And when they're doing that sort of underhanded back alley deals with the government and then reneging on them, it's not a good look for a public broadcaster. I think that's where the animosity is coming as well.
I was going to say I didn't see much of that reported, but then obviously the BBC's not going to be reporting their own.
BBC's like, shh.
Yeah, yeah, they're not going to be reporting that.
Yeah, exactly.
They had to go to Channel 4 to get the dirt on BBC.
Exactly. You've got to spread your wings on that one.
Yeah, you mentioned numbers just now, and it reminded me of a statistic that I thought was important because this got brought up a few years ago, possibly when the handover happened in 2017. And I heard a statistic that just made me laugh was the fact that just for those of you who don't know, channels on BBC kind of decline in quality as you get higher in number.
Yeah.
Just broadly, like the funding all goes to BBC One, and then there's like less funding for BBC Two, and so on and so on.
Yeah.
And BBC, apparently all of the pensioners who were getting it for free, if they had been paying the TV license, the amount altogether would be the same amount as the funding for BBC Two, so the second biggest BBC channel. That's just the sound of me. Like, with all these pensioners paying for it, they could pay for another BBC Two, or they could double the funding of BBC Two.
I've got the stats here. Actually, it's
Okay.
it's worse than that. It was BBC Two. So if they had to pay for all these pensioners, it's going to be 750 million by 2022, which is a fifth of the BBC's budget, rising to 1 billion by 2030. Now, the 2022 number would be the budget for BBC Two, as you say, plus BBC Three, plus BBC Four, plus BBC News, plus BBC C, what is that? And CBeebies, the child channel. So all of those would be equal to the amount they would have to pay to cover these over 75-year-olds.
Yeah.
Or they'd have to find additional revenue.
I think that's not quite the right way around of looking at it. I mean, I don't know, like, they're projecting their losses perhaps into the future, but I think they're obviously funding these channels so far, and it's not that they would lose those channels exactly, it's just that they could be doubling the funding of those channels if they just had these pensions. And also in the future they're projecting even bigger losses from this thing. So
yes. So you mentioned the aging population. By 2030, this is going to go up by another third. So it's going to be £1 billion for them to cover the over 75s by 2030 projected. So you can understand them wanting to kind of get out of this as soon as possible. Otherwise, it's only going to get worse for them.
Yeah, I'm interested in how these numbers have been calculated, because it's obvious. It's really easy to just take the number of over 75-year-olds and then multiply that by £154.50 every year. But I think that's this was brought up on the Academic Agents stream last night. When they talked about this, they were saying that it's actually not obvious that that's the right amount, because 75-year-olds might live together. They might also, they might not be paying the TV license. They might, like, even if they get it for free, when they start charging for it, they might not get that money. They might go, okay, well, I don't want it.
Yeah.
Like my parents-in-law and my parents, like I said, they're not 75 yet, but they probably would be in that group, perhaps.
So the BBC, supposedly, they commissioned some independent research last year.
Oh, yeah.
So when it was brought in, this free license fee in 2003 by Gordon Brown, the idea was that half of pensioners were in relative poverty, and now supposedly that's gone down to a third. So the BBC are kind of saying, oh, well, it's a bit of a blunt instrument. We don't have to pay for these over 75s anymore. But given the BBC's track record on following through on the suggestions of independent research, as they didn't do with the equal pay study that showed they hadn't breached equal pay laws, I'm surprised that the BBC decides to follow some independent research and throw other independent research under the bus. So they say this is based on independent research, but I would have to look at that research to know how those numbers were calculated. As you say, it's not particularly clear to me at the moment.
Yeah, I think it definitely is an interesting question as to whether this was a wise decision by the BBC or not. I think it's definitely one that's gone down badly with the public, and a number of politicians have called it out as well as being a bad call. I don't agree. I think it's absolutely fine to to go back on. They're giving it away for free. Maybe if they increase the age to match the the average income or quality of life in general. People are living longer, but they're also they're kind of they're more independent for longer.
We know you don't hate old people. It's fine. We know you don't hate.
Okay. Well, I just think it's I think it'll be interesting to see what actually happens with the BBC, especially with this. And
it just looks bad, right? People don't like it. They think you're picking on old people. People have made the angle of 1 million people out of this 3.7 million are veterans. It's just not a good look. I remember before the last general election, the Conservatives getting absolutely slammed because they were cutting, was it dementia benefits for the old people? People don't like it's seen as beating up on old people. So it's just not a good look.
Yeah.
Even if the policy itself is quite well grounded and reasonable, in its effect, it just doesn't look or feel good to people looking in on it.
I think that's just one of those things that I think we just have to look at this as an example, as we've seen with so many other examples of just think about this when you're about to give someone a service for free. I mean, if you're just giving them an income, a pension benefit or whatever, pension credits, universal credits, whatever, you can change the amount of that up and down a little bit. People will get irritated, or they'll celebrate it, but it's not near, for some reason, it's not nearly as bad as taking away a service for free seems to really upset people. I think we just have to remember that. And it's the same thing. I remember years ago I was talking about that. Are you aware that all parents in the UK, regardless of income, get a little allowance for each child they have that's under the age of 18. Each dependent they have in the house, below the age of 18, they get a small monthly amount just put in their account. It's like a benefit that all people in the UK can have if they have children. And it's the same amount for everybody, I believe. And it's something that got brought in, I think, about 60 or 70 years ago for a very specific reason. But no government will ever repeal it, even though so many of these people do not need that extra money. It's an absolute waste of money for most of the people receiving this. And you could be giving the low-income people even more to look after their kids if you weren't giving the rest of these people like me and my husband and my parents. They don't need that.
You could have a much more targeted policy that actually helps people who need it rather than...
Exactly.
But because it's been there, people...
it's a bad look, like you say. You can't take that away because then you're the guy who's like, oh, what? You don't think people should be paid to have money, to have children? Do you hate? Do you hate people having children? Do you understand people want to have children?
What was that thing, that viral tweet that I saw this week that was doing the rounds on Twitter, where it said, you say, somebody writes, I like vanilla, and then the other person shouts back, oh, so you're saying you hate chocolate? You're saying I hate children by taking away that. It's like, no. I'm saying we can use this money better, but people see that false dichotomy all the time. And as you say,
it's the same thing with free milk that Margaret Thatcher took away. She's still called the milk snatcher for doing that. And she was the education secretary. She wanted to channel that money into other parts of education. She wasn't taking away that money and putting it somewhere else or in her own pocket or something. She was taking it from the milk, which was like a really arbitrary thing that children were given anyway.
That was disgusting, by the way. That school milk was absolutely foul. It was always sour. I remember...
How old are you?
35. Last check. But I remember it was always really sour. And because I was, a narcissistic git and good at school, I used to always put my hand up because we didn't have enough for the whole class. So it was always whoever got the questions right. And I didn't want it, but I wanted to get the question right. And then I was just saddled with this horrible bottle of sour milk. Funny story about milk, but you're right.
Exact same thing.
People don't look at balancing the pros and cons. They're only seeing the cons of taking this away and the bad look of that.
No, I was just going to say that the milk was just such an arbitrary decision in the first. Somebody in the government decided that milk was a good thing for children to have. Calcium, fat, protein. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but because just somebody made this decision and everybody kind of went, that sounds milk. Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, we'd like milk. Why not? It's made in Britain.
And I think that's the same with the BBC. Exactly. It's just always been there. It's the Beeb. It's always been there. And they think these old people will just be like, oh yeah, I need it, it's always been there. Whereas, as you say, a lot of them are getting more tech savvy, they realise the choices that are out there, and they're not as dependent on the BBC as they're being taken, for granted of thinking.
I think it's the whole thing's just condescending and just it irritated me on like a multi-layered basis. It was like
we pulled on a few of the strands. There's definitely a few ways of
a beautiful tapestry of irritation.
Yes, that's a very nice metaphor for it, I think.
Okay, well, if you don't have any more thoughts on that, I do have a bonus meme, as PewDiePie used to call it. I've got a bonus image for you.
Are we going to roll up Ben Shapiro for some sort?
I want you to. I've got a little quiz for you.
Yes.
I've got this headline. You can't see it, but the people at home will see it. I just took a little screenshot of it.
This sounds ominous.
If you know the news, then this won't be. Then this you'll already be cheating when you answer this question. But
I haven't really looked at the news today, to be
okay.
honest.
Well, I saw this. There's a headline today. It's from a couple of hours ago only, from the Independent. The headline. I want you to interpret this headline for me.
Okay.
And tell me what this headline is literally like. What does semantically? What does this headline mean?
Okay.
I'm just trying to put this somewhere so that I can see you and the headline at the same time.
Okay.
I'll put it behind myself actually. It's the headline is. You can take notes if you like. You said you've got a pen there.
I've got a little bit of pencil which has snapped, but I thought I would look, pensive and thoughtful with it. So,
Brexit : MPs vote. Sorry, excuse me. I'll start again.
all right.
Brexit : MPs lose vote in bid to prevent future Tory PM forcing through no deal. There's so many negatives in that sentence. I had to work through it like backwards, like a little brain teaser, to figure out what it meant.
That's a tough one.
MPs lose the vote in a bid to prevent future Tory PM forcing through no deal.
So that suggests that most of the Tory MPs don't want no deal, and therefore they've lost a vote to prevent it. I think that's what that means.
I don't know. I think that sounded convincing.
Independent hates Brexit, so obviously they're going to say
okay, yeah.
they're going to focus on the MPs from the Tory side that don't want it. So
okay,
that helped me through.
No, you got it. You got it. Yeah, no, you got it. The Tory MPs wanted to prevent no deal.
Yeah.
But they've lost the vote to do so. So you get 10 points.
It's tricky.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining me.
Always a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
And thank you, all of you watching, for joining us and making it all the way to the end. I probably do have some announcements to make or something, but I have forgotten. So check out the comment section and maybe I'll pin something if there's something important I was supposed to tell you.
Yeah, I'll get in there and chat to people in there.
Yeah, you're always really good at responding to comments that are directed at you.
I have too much time on my hands, so I'm always in there. I'll probably share the video on my channel as well. So if you
go ahead.
Seeing this at the end, subscribe to Poe's channel because she has videos and there's always something fun going on. So
similarly
over
to
the
Sam,
person and subscribe if you're one of my subscribers.
Yeah, all right. Absolutely subscribe to Sam. Everybody have a good night.
Good night, everyone.